What happens when Hollywood's most straightforward tough guy sits down with late-night television's most passive-aggressive host? You get an interview that spiraled so far out of control that security had to physically escort Mark Wahlberg off the set of The Late Show. But the real shock isn't what Wahlberg said. It's how Stephen Colbert systematically baited him into an explosion that would end his career if the cameras hadn't been rolling. The tension was palpable from the moment Wahlberg walked onto the stage. Fresh off promoting his latest action thriller, the Boston native looked ready for a typical promotional tour stop. Maybe crack a few jokes about his workout routine. Talk about his family. Keep things light. What he got instead was an ambush disguised as an interview. Colbert started innocently enough, his trademark smirk already hinting at trouble brewing beneath the surface. "Mark, welcome back to the show. I have to say, watching your new movie, I couldn't help but notice the violence. Lots and lots of violence. Do you ever worry about the message you're sending to young people?" Wahlberg shifted in his chair, clearly caught off guard by the loaded question. "Listen, Stephen, it's an action movie. People know what they're getting into when they buy a ticket. We're not making a documentary here. But surely you recognize the responsibility that comes with your platform," Colbert pressed, his voice dripping with faux concern. "I mean, you've had your own run-ins with violence in the past, haven't you? The hate crimes in your youth, the assault charges. Don't you think there's a certain irony in you profiting off of violent entertainment?" The audience fell silent. Even they could sense that Colbert had crossed a line, bringing up decades-old mistakes that Wahlberg had publicly apologized for countless times. The actor's jaw tightened, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. "You know what, Stephen? I came here to talk about my movie, not to get psychoanalyzed by someone who's never spent a day outside of a television studio," Wahlberg replied, his Boston accent getting thicker as his patience wore thin. "I made mistakes. When I was a kid, I owned up to them. I apologized. I changed my life. What more do you want from me?" Colbert leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the discomfort he was causing. "Oh, I'm not looking for anything, Mark. I'm just curious about the disconnect between the man who preaches about redemption and second chances, and the man who keeps making movies where problems are solved with fists and guns. It seems a bit hypocritical, doesn't it?" "Hypocritical?" Wahlberg's voice rose slightly. "You want to talk about hypocritical? You sit behind this desk every night making jokes about people, tearing them down for entertainment, and you want to lecture me about responsibility? At least when I make a movie, people choose to watch it. Your audience tunes in to watch you destroy people's reputations for laughs." The late-night host's smile never wavered, but something darker flashed in his eyes. "That's an interesting perspective, Mark, but I think there's a difference between political satire and glorifying violence. Though I suppose when you've spent most of your career playing the same angry tough guy character, it might be hard to see the distinction." Wahlberg stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward. "You know what? I'm done with this. This isn't an interview, it's a hit job. You brought me on here under false pretenses, just so you could ambush me with this garbage." "Please, sit down, Mark," Colbert said, his tone now openly mocking. "We're just having a conversation. Surely someone who's made millions playing tough guys can handle a few challenging questions." "Challenging questions?" Wahlberg's voice was getting louder now, his famous temper starting to show. "You're not asking questions, you're making accusations. There's a difference between journalism and whatever this is supposed to be." Colbert turned to the camera with an exaggerated look of confusion. "Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Wahlberg, showing us all how to handle criticism with grace and maturity." The audience laughed nervously, unsure of whether they were witnessing comedy or a genuine confrontation. That laugh was the final straw. Wahlberg's face flushed red as he pointed at the host. "You think this is funny? You think destroying people's careers for your little comedy show is entertainment? You're nothing but a parasite, Stephen. You feed off other people's success because you've never created anything meaningful in your entire life." The studio, Audience gasped. This was clearly going beyond the usual late-night television banter. Colbert's mask finally slipped, and for just a moment, genuine anger flashed across his face before he composed himself. Well, that's certainly an interesting take from someone whose greatest acting achievement is talking to a teddy bear, Colbert shot back, his voice venomous despite his continued smile. But please, tell us more about meaningful creation. I'm sure the audience would love to hear your thoughts on art from someone who turned down the lead role in Brokeback Mountain because he was too insecure about his masculinity. The comment hit like a physical blow. Wahlberg's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You son of a bitch," he growled, taking a step toward the desk. "You want to keep pushing me? Because I guarantee you won't like where this goes." Security guards appeared at the edges of the stage, clearly alerted by the escalating situation. But Colbert wasn't backing down. If anything, he seemed energized by the chaos he had created. "Are you threatening me on live television, Mark?" he asked with mock innocence. "Because that would be quite the story, wouldn't it? Mark Wahlberg threatens talk show host, just like old times in Dorchester. Some people never really change, do they?" The reference to his old neighborhood was the nuclear option, and Colbert knew exactly what he was doing when he dropped it. Wahlberg's entire body went rigid, his face turning a shade of red that the studio lights couldn't hide. The security guards took another step closer, but they were still hesitant to intervene in what was supposed to be a comedy show. "You want to go there?" Wahlberg's voice was barely controlled, each word deliberate and dangerous. "You want to talk about Dorchester? You grew up in South Carolina in a nice little suburban bubble, didn't you, Stephen? Private schools, college, prep, the whole privileged white boy experience. You have no idea what it's like to grow up where I grew up, to make the mistakes I made because you had other options." Colbert's smugness never wavered. "Oh, I'm sorry. Are we playing the victim card now? Poor little Mark Wahlberg, the millionaire movie star who can't take responsibility for his actions without blaming his zip code. How very Boston of you." "Responsibility?" Wahlberg laughed bitterly. "I've taken more responsibility for my past than you've taken for anything in your entire pampered life. You sit in your ivory tower making jokes about people you've never met, problems you've never faced, and you think that makes you better than everyone else." The audience was completely silent now. This had gone far beyond uncomfortable and into genuinely frightening territory. But Colbert seemed to be feeding off the tension, his eyes bright with malicious glee. "You know what, Mark? You're right. I didn't grow up in the streets. I grew up learning how to think critically, how to ask tough questions, how to hold people accountable. Maybe that's why I can see through the act you've been putting on for decades." "Act?" Wahlberg stepped closer to the desk, the security guards now moving into position behind him. "What act is that, Stephen?" "The reformed bad boy act, the family man act, the devout Catholic act. It's all branding, isn't it? Because the real Mark Wahlberg, the one we're seeing right now, is the same angry kid who beat up innocent people, because they looked different than him. You've just learned to hide it better, but here we are, and the mask is slipping." That was it. The final thread holding Wahlberg's composure together snapped. He lunged forward, his hands slamming down on Colbert's desk with such force that the coffee mug jumped and spilled across the surface. "You sanctimonious piece of garbage!" he roared, leaning across the desk until he was inches from Colbert's face. "You think you can destroy people's lives for ratings and call it comedy? You think you can dig up every mistake someone's ever made and throw it in their face just because you have a television show?" For the first time since the interview began, Colbert looked genuinely rattled. But he quickly recovered, turning to the camera with theatrical concern. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is exactly what I was talking about. This is the real Mark Wahlberg, folks, still solving problems with intimidation and violence." "Violence?" Wahlberg was shouting now, his Boston accent so thick it was almost hard to understand. "You want to see violence? I haven't laid a hand on you, but you've been beating me up with your words for the last 10 minutes, trying to humiliate me on national television for your own sick entertainment. Sir, we need you to step back from the desk, one of the security guards said firmly, finally intervening as the situation spiraled completely out of control. Wahlberg spun around to face the guard, his eyes wild. Step back? This guy just spent the last 15 minutes trying to destroy my reputation, questioning my character, bringing up mistakes from 30 years ago, and you want me to step back. Colbert seized the moment, speaking directly to the camera while Wahlberg was distracted. This is exactly the kind of behavior we've come to expect from certain Hollywood types. When confronted with legitimate questions about their past and their choices, they resort to threats and intimidation instead of honest discussion. Wahlberg whipped back around, his voice reaching a crescendo. Legitimate questions? You ambushed me, you lying snake. You brought me on here under false pretenses, pretended this was going to be a normal interview, and then tried to publicly lynch me for things I did as a teenager. What kind of sick person does that? The kind of person who believes in accountability, Colbert replied smoothly, clearly back in his element now that security was present. The kind of person who thinks that maybe, just maybe, celebrities shouldn't get a free pass on their past behavior just because they can act tough in movies. Accountability? Wahlberg was beyond reason now, his voice cracking with rage. Where's your accountability, Stephen? When do you answer for the damage you do to people with your so-called comedy? When do you take responsibility for using your platform to tear people down instead of building them up? The audience was shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Some were pulling out their phones, clearly recording what was rapidly becoming the most explosive moment in late-night television history. The cameras were still rolling, capturing every second of the meltdown. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the stage, the head of security said, moving closer to Wahlberg. Leave the stage? Wahlberg turned his fury on the security team now. I'm the victim here. This man just spent the last 20 minutes trying to assassinate my character on live television, and you want me to leave? Colbert couldn't resist. One final twist of the knife. Mark, maybe you should leave. Cool off a little. Maybe hit the gym, work out some of that anger. Though knowing your history, I hope there aren't any Asian elderly gentlemen in the parking lot. The reference to his most shameful past incident was the final straw. Wahlberg's self-control shattered completely. He grabbed the edge of Colbert's desk and flipped it forward, sending papers, coffee, and desk accessories flying across the stage. The crash was thunderous, and several audience members screamed. The crash of the desk hitting the floor echoed through the studio like a gunshot. Papers scattered everywhere, coffee dripped from the edge of the stage, and for a moment, complete silence fell over the entire room. Even Colbert looked shocked at what his relentless provocation had finally accomplished. But that moment of stunned quiet lasted only seconds before chaos erupted. That's it, you're done, the head security guard barked, grabbing Wahlberg by the arm. But the actor wasn't finished. 30 years of built-up rage, decades of being judged for his worst moments, and 20 minutes of systematic humiliation had created a perfect storm that couldn't be contained by a simple desk flip. Get your hands off me, Wahlberg snarled, shaking off the guard's grip. He turned back to Colbert, who was now standing behind his overturned desk, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking. You think this is over? You think you can just destroy someone and walk away clean? Mark, you need to calm down, Colbert said, but his voice was shaking now. For the first time in the entire interview, he looked genuinely afraid of what he had unleashed. Calm down? Wahlberg's laugh was harsh and bitter. You spent the last half hour trying to humiliate me on national television, bringing up every mistake I've ever made, questioning my character, my faith, my family. And now you want me to calm down? You're a coward, Stephen. A coward who hides behind jokes and fake sincerity while you poison people's minds against anyone who doesn't fit your narrow little worldview. The security team was trying to form a barrier between Wahlberg and Colbert, but the actor was still talking, his voice carrying across the stunned studio. "You want to know what the real problem is? It's not me, it's you. It's people like you, who think they're better than everyone else, who think they have the right to judge and condemn without ever having walked in someone else's shoes. Sir, we need you to leave immediately," another security guard said, reaching for Wahlberg's other arm. "I'll leave when I'm finished," Wahlberg snapped, pulling away again. He pointed at Colbert, who was now visibly sweating under the studio lights. "You sit behind that desk every night pretending to be some kind of moral authority. But what have you ever done? What have you ever built? What have you ever created besides division and hatred?" Colbert tried to regain control of the situation, turning to the camera with a shaky smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've seen enough to prove the point I was trying to make about anger management and personal growth." "Don't you dare!" Wahlberg roared, stepping around the security guards toward the camera. "Don't you dare try to spin this. You set me up, you ambushed me, you deliberately tried to trigger me, and now you want to act like this proves something about my character? The only thing this proves is what a manipulative, sadistic piece of garbage you really are." The camera operators didn't know whether to keep filming or cut away. The producers in the control room were probably having heart attacks. But Wahlberg wasn't done. He looked directly into the lens, his eyes blazing with fury. "You want to see the real Mark Wahlberg? Here I am. I'm not perfect, I never claimed to be perfect. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, when I was a kid. But I owned up to them. I apologized. I changed my life. I became a better person. But apparently that's not enough for people like Stephen Colbert. Apparently redemption isn't allowed in his world. Apparently once you make a mistake, you're marked for life, and people like him get to use it against you whenever they want to boost their ratings." "Mark, please," Colbert tried to interrupt, but Wahlberg cut him off. "No, you don't get to talk anymore. You've said enough. You brought me on this show under false pretenses. You lied to me and my representatives about what this interview would be about, and then you systematically tried to destroy my reputation for your own entertainment. That's not journalism. That's not comedy. That's just cruelty." The security team finally managed to get a firm grip on both of Wahlberg's arms, but he continued talking even as they started to escort him toward the exit. "You know what the saddest part is, Stephen? I actually used to respect you. I thought you were intelligent. I thought you asked tough but fair questions. But this isn't journalism. This is a hit job. This is what happens when someone gets so drunk on their own power that they forget they're supposed to be a human being first and a talk show host second." Colbert was desperately trying to regain control of his show, but Wahlberg's voice was still carrying across the studio as the guards moved him slowly toward the wings. And to everyone watching at home, remember this moment. Remember what you just saw. This is what passes for entertainment in America now. This is what we've become. We don't build people up anymore, we tear them down. We don't celebrate redemption, we punish it. We don't forgive, we destroy. "Mark, that's enough," the head security guard said firmly, but there was almost a note of sympathy in his voice. Even he could see that Wahlberg had been set up. As they reached the edge of the stage, Wahlberg turned back one final time, his voice now more sad than angry. "You know what, Stephen? I actually feel sorry for you, because this is all you have. This is your legacy. 30 years from now, when people talk about Stephen Colbert, they won't remember the jokes or the interviews. They'll remember the night you tried to destroy a man on live television just because you could. They'll remember the night you showed America who you really are underneath all that fake charm and manufactured outrage." Colbert stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, completely unable to respond. The audience sat in stunned silence, many of them clearly uncomfortable with what they had just witnessed. Some were openly crying, others looked angry, but none of them were laughing anymore. And one more thing, Wahlberg called out as the security guards finally managed to get him to the exit. To all the kids out there watching this, to all the people who have made mistakes in their lives, don't let anyone tell you that you can't change, that you can't be better. Don't let people like Stephen Colbert convince you that your worst moment defines your entire life. You can be better, you can do better, and you don't need the approval of some talk show host to prove your worth. With that, Mark Wahlberg was escorted off the stage of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, leaving behind an overturned desk, a shaken host, and a studio full of people who had just witnessed the complete destruction of what was supposed to be a simple promotional interview.